So thank you everybody for coming to the Duke General Surgery office hours on research this wonderful Thursday evening. We're very excited to share what we think is an integral part of our program. So the first question I just want to answer briefly as I give an overview here is why the surgeon scientist. Two quotes here. The first from Dr. Thomas D'Amico about Dr. Saveston, who was our chair for the better half of the second half of the 20th century. Was his philosophy was that the best surgeons were curious and competent scientists, as well as technically proficient surgeons. So we have a long history of surgeon scientists at Duke, and additionally, we have a lot of infrastructure around that. And our current chair, Dr. Alan Kirk, said it best, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but that disease is often best studied by those who hold the pathology in their hands. And I think surgeons have an intimate understanding of disease, and through that are able to gain insights because they're one of the few professions these days that doesn't treat a patient solely through epic orders. Tonight, we're going to have a number of panelists who are going to share their perspectives on research at Duke and their experiences. And if people wouldn't mind going around and just introducing themselves briefly so we can flow fluidly through the presentations. I'll start, my name's Brian Shaw. I'm a PGY4 second year in the lab. I went to UCSF for medical school and I'm from California. So, and I work in transplant immunology. Marcelo, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Marcelo Cerullo. I am from the great state of New Jersey. And then like a lot of people you meet outside of New Jersey, left very quickly. Went to college at Harvard, spent some time at Mass General doing policy research, and then went to Hopkins for medical school where I did an MPH between my third and fourth year. I'm going to be talking a little bit about something that surgeons are increasingly, a field of research that surgeons are increasingly encroaching on. So I study financial systems and hospital markets and how that affects surgical care.
Doreen?
Should probably unmute myself. I'm Doreen, I'm PGY3. I am from California, like Brian. Went to UC Berkeley for undergrad, and then I went to Duke for med school. I am going to talk about research dealing with administration and looking at operations.
SJ?
Hey, I'm Sarah Jane, and this is my daughter, Brooke. I'm a fourth year. I am from Texas, and I went to college at Stanford Medical School at Baylor College of Medicine, and obviously at Duke for residency. I'm going into pediatric surgery, hopefully, and then my research is in clinical trials and global health.
Konstantinos, I know, is joining from another meeting, so he'll be coming a bit later, but he hails from Greece and went to the University of Athens. And he'll be talking to us a little bit about some design and engineering programs. Oliver?
Yep, I'm Oliver Jawitz. I'm a fifth-year general surgery resident. I'm from New York originally, and I went to Yale for medical school. I just finished 2 years in the lab where I was doing outcomes-based clinical research in cardiac surgery, and I plan on training in cardiac surgery after general surgery. So looking forward to chatting with you all about that.
Sam?
Hey guys, what's up? I'm Sam. I'm originally from New Hampshire. I went to Dartmouth for medical school, found my way down here. I'm currently a fourth year, so in my second year in the Duke Ex Vivo Organ Lab. My interest clinically is in transplantation.
Vignesh?
Vignesh, PGY5 from Singapore originally, med school at Dartmouth, interested in thoracic surgery, and I'll talk to you about about 2 or 3 different types of research that we do.
And Justin?
I'm Justin Rucker. I'm a third year, first year in the lab, clinically interested in thoracic surgery. I'm in a lab that focuses on basically an immunogenic form of programmed cell death, and I'm looking at that process and stimulating anti-tumor immunity in lung cancer.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So just some basics of how research works here at Duke. It's a 2-year research fellowship. We go out after clinical year 2 and then return in clinical year 3 out of 5. It is fully sponsored by the department. That is bolded and underlined for a reason. There is no need for you to get your own funding. We have funding. We ask that everyone put in grants. I'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide, but you are not required to moonlight. If you choose to moonlight, that funding goes somewhere else. That's called your bank account, but you are not required to at all. Additional degrees are often pursued and funded by the department, including masters and PhDs. And there's opportunities to prepare across a broad range of specialties if you already have one of those degrees. And we have a lot of different things that we can do very well at Duke. We're going to highlight some of those tonight, but people are also welcome and encouraged, if the program is right, to go to other institutions. A lot of people asked about mentorship in the questions. We help people identify research mentors in their intern year and work with those mentors over the first 2 years. We have a formalized curriculum with the program director of the research fellowship, who is David Harpole, to make sure that everyone has a good research plan moving forward. And additionally, we have a lot of informal or formal relationships between the more senior residents and the more junior residents to get people involved in research early, if that's something that they want to do and they have time early on in their residency. In terms of funding, again, the department sponsors the research year, but we ask everyone to put together what's called an F32 grant, style grant. This is an individual NIH grant that if you get funded, that's great. It looks great on your CV, but we also have a lot of training grants. We have a number of spots on 3 different T32 training grants. We also have a really interesting and helpful mechanism called the R38, which is a training grant in which you are eligible during that grant for salary support and research funding. And then it directly leads into a K. So this is like, you are on an R38, you can apply for a K. There are certain administrative hurdles, but that K will be funded. So I think that's a really awesome opportunity that we have. And then a lot of people who write these great F32s, even if the NIH doesn't love them, because that's a very high bar, as we all know, then they're able to use them to get them funded for society grants. And myself and others have both had success in that mechanism. So we already kind of talked about our research topic areas. Sam Kesley will be talking about basic and translational science. Justin Rucker will be talking about his research and pursuing a PhD. And then we've got kind of the list here. We already went over this a little bit, but one area I did want to talk about as well is that there is life that happens during research. So these are some pictures of my wife and I, who is also a resident in OBGYN, going to the beach, spending some time doing some very difficult data analysis on the porch with my dog. And then you kind of saw already, spoiled the surprise, but we're very lucky to welcome our first child during my research years, our son, James. So there is a lot of opportunity for that during research time. Certainly Duke is not a place where you can only do research during research. So I'll go ahead and let Sam take it over.
All right, guys, I've got 5 minutes to cover a year's worth of passion here. I'm in the Ex Vivo Organ Lab. I wanted to show these photos at the beginning just to kind of highlight that Duke is a fantastic place to be interested in translational research. On the left, this is our transplant surgery team, several attendings in this picture, but with the OrganOx device, doing a clinical trial, the first clinical trial in North America with this device. And then on the right panel, Duke CT surgeons doing the first DCD heart transplant with the TransMedics OCS device as part of the EXPAND trial, I believe. So just a very fertile environment. A quick background for those interested in transplant. I'm sure you've heard about these devices, but essentially machine perfusion is changing the game in transplantation. Instead of the old paradigm where we'd throw organs on ice, we're now able to supply and perfuse them with various different perfusates containing oxygen and try to keep them alive outside the body. And that has several advantages, but namely all these trials below, the COPE trial in liver transplantation, the INSPIRE trial in lung transplantation, and the EXPAND trial in heart transplantation have already shown that we can keep organs alive longer with these devices, and the patients do just as well, even if we're using what are called expanded criteria organs, or grafts that really aren't as good. In addition, there's several other advantages to using machines like this, because we can intervene upon the graft with novel therapeutics and also assess it in real time and find out if it's going to eventually be viable for transplant. So hopefully these will help expand the donor pool, or, well, they already are. Go ahead to the next slide for me, Brian. So I joined the Duke Ex Vivo Organ Lab. This is actually a pretty young lab at the Duke Transplant Center right now. My PI is Andrew Barbas, who's one of our abdominal transplant surgeons. And I've also got senior leadership from Dr. Parker, who's our lead scientist, Dr. Hartwig, who's a lung transplant surgeon, and Patrick Davis, who's one of our CT surgery fellows, who was also involved in kind of founding a lot of the lab protocols. So our lab is kind of focused on studying a variety of different mechanisms by which we could recondition or optimize organs prior to transplant using these new technologies that will be coming out to the market quite soon. Right now, we have a pretty robust rat, lung, and liver transplant model that you can see there. I've also established a non-human primate model using an old ECMO device pictured in the top right hand corner there. And we're currently actually partnering with a company in the Research Triangle working on a large animal model device that can perfuse lungs, kidneys, and livers all on one device. I'll try to recap one of our projects really quickly just to show you what one thing that we've been able to do. This was a study of what's called subnormothermic perfusion in a rat model for lung transplant. Currently in lung transplant, we use these devices at 37 degrees Celsius because that's physiologic, but there's a kind of a growing body of literature that it may be better to perfuse organs at a slightly lower temperature, kind of a middle ground between cold storage on ice and physiologic temperature. So we did this experiment where we had a control group of organs that were just static cold storage, and then we compared an experimental arm where we perfused rat lungs on this small device here at 3 different temperatures, 37, 30, or 25 degrees. We then transplanted the lungs and then collected the tissues after. And what we were able to show is that there wasn't really any difference in the lung function or the P to F ratio during the perfusion, but we saw a trend in increasing PA pressure in the lungs that were perfused at normothermia, and that's suggestive of a greater vascular resistance and more injury to the lung. We also showed that all of the groups had a decrease in compliance, which is bad over the course of the perfusion, but that absolute number at least was the best in the 25 Celsius group. We also showed that the cytokine TNF alpha, which promotes inflammation, was increased in the organs perfused at 37 degrees. Go to the next slide. We also showed that damage-associated molecular patterns, which are inflammatory molecules that actually propagate ongoing inflammation, increase in a time-dependent fashion during these perfusions, and that at the higher temperatures, the percent increase from baseline was the highest. Lastly, after we transplanted the lungs, we took them out of the rats at 2 hours and got these histology slides. And you can see quite nicely here that at 37 degrees, there was markedly more intraalveolar hemorrhage, edema, and congestion, reflective of a higher histologic injury to the graft. So we're able to show here that perhaps 25 degrees or 30 degrees might be a less injurious parameter to perfuse lungs at. Huge thank you to everybody. These are all the people that have surrounded me in this project, and it's just one of many things that all these people have helped me with. But if anybody has questions about this kind of research at Duke, feel free to reach out by email or tweet at me. I'll be sure to be posting pictures of organs on machines.
Great. Justin, you want to go ahead?
Sure. So I think, I don't have really much in the way of data at this point, it's second month into the lab, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the process of pursuing a PhD. When I went to Duke for medical school as well, and we do a year in the lab then, and I got interested in immunology. So I knew that coming to Duke, research was a very heavy component of what my choice to pursue Duke for residency. And I think that during my initial meetings with Dr. Kirk and discussing research, the idea of the PhD came up. I think that you will find when you come here that there is an immense amount of support for most research endeavors and pursuing advanced degrees. So, when I went to meet with Dr. Kirk and Dr. Harpole to discuss my research here, the question was always like, what are you going to do for your advanced degree? Not are you going to do one? So that getting support was very easy. As Brian mentioned, there's a lot of funding available to do that. So I'm on the T32 in immunobiology, which you can do master's level coursework or PhD. From that process, it was very easy to find a mentor. Dr. Kirk is very helpful with that as well, actually. I had sort of a general idea of what I was interested in, as I kind of alluded to earlier, clinically interested in thoracic oncology, and given sort of everything that has gone on with the advancement of immunotherapeutics and that space, I was very interested in learning more about tumor oncology. And so Dr. Kirk actually suggested meeting with my mentor, Francis Chan, who does work on necroptosis, which is a type of programmed cell death that is able to stimulate a adaptive immune response. And in the context of cancers, it's been shown that introduction of necroptotic cells to the tumor microenvironment can impair tumor growth and improve survival, but the exact mechanisms haven't really been worked out. So it really worked out nicely that he was sort of looking for someone. The lab mostly has looked at necroptosis in the context of antiviral immunity. So this was something that was sort of a unique spin on what the lab was already doing. So that process worked out very well. In terms of some of the logistical things, I still applied to the graduate school. I had an interview day where I met with several of the faculty members, mostly just for them to know me, but it was a pretty informal interview process. And I'm still on. You take coursework. In some classes for the first year, you do get some of the requirements waived, sort of similar to the MSTP students. I think that there is there's some benefits to doing PhD this way. Obviously, the downside is the extension of research time, which can kind of go on indefinitely for graduate school. But I think in comparison to other ways to potentially do this, it's nice. And like Brian said, you get paid like a surgical resident versus a graduate student. You don't have to worry about funding in the same ways that other graduate students do. In the process of writing this F32 during your second year, I think you get a much kind of clearer idea of what you're going to pursue in the lab than a lot of the incoming graduate students. I think, part of that is the process of graduate school. In general, they are sort of being a little bit more exploratory and figuring out what they want to do, but you have sort of a greater sense of focus. So I think, it's not uncommon for people who do basic research to extend their lab time. And so for me, this is like, I'll just extend it a little bit more. But I think that as it's been said, surgeons have a unique opportunity to be involved in translational research, and particularly in oncology, where we have a lot of access to human tissue. And so for me, it was really important to get a rigorous training in sort of the basic mechanistic studies and translational work, as well as some of the methods that would sort of allow me to continue this going forward.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Justin. Vignesh, I think these are your slides.
Yes. Hi, I'm Vignesh, and my interest is thoracic surgery. I spent my 2 years of research on a combination of translational, clinical, and community-related work. It's funded by an NIH T32 grant for surgical oncology. My translational work was a mix of using biobank tissue to uncover the genetic profile of lung neuroendocrine tumors, and furthering a multi-institutional collaboration to validate a genetic signature-based prognostic classification of mesothelioma, and development of patient-derived xenograft models of mesothelioma to test novel targets for therapy. I was fortunate to receive 2 extramural grants totaling $40,000 to support my translational work. And in addition, I obtained my master's in health sciences by the Duke Clinical Research Training Program, and worked closely with Oliver, whom you'll hear from, on clinical research projects in cardiothoracic surgery. Finally, I spent a substantial amount of time researching disparities in access to cancer care, and along with my former and current co-residents, founded a nonprofit that aims to bridge disparities in access to lung cancer screening via community outreach and political advocacy. Next slide. So several of you asked about mentorship. In residency, I've been fortunate to receive guidance from many people, ranging from Dr. Harpol, top left, whose laboratory I worked in, to Drs. Tong and Fayanju, with whom I do health disparities work, to my senior and former chief residents like Drs. Yang and Turner, who introduced me to the world of clinical research. But perhaps the most significant part of research years were the memories I made with my family and friends. My class hiked in Zion, top left photo. My family and I took trips to Japan and Australia. I met my partner, John, and we adopted our pandemic puppy, Raja, that you see walking around here. Time in research is not just about academic productivity, but also about recovering balance, acquiring wisdom about what we value most in life, and learning to view the world with an ever-expanding and nuanced lens that increasingly focuses on how we can best serve humanity. That's all I have.
Great. Konstantinos, I heard you were here.
Yeah, and after Vignesh, it's going to be a tough job. I'm Konstantinos Economopoulos. I'm a PGY4 general surgery resident in my second year of research. And I'm also a master's student in biomedical engineering. And my research focuses on medical device design and innovation. So during the next few minutes, I'll try to present to you this transformative experience that I've had during my first year of research at Duke as a Duke Design Health Fellow. But let me give a little bit of context here. There was a time that I swear I was younger and I had more hair. And I was doing basic science, working with small animal models. I was writing a lot of scientific papers, and in my free time, I was embarking in translational science endeavors and absolutely loved working in multidisciplinary teams. So that was the time I joined Duke, and time has passed. I lost a lot of hair. And it seems that the more I was in the operating room, the more I was bothered by all those things that we do know that we can do better, and we just don't. So what I did not tell you is that I always like to make things with my hands, and that's when I had my aha moment. So there is a gap between engineering and medicine that I felt with my prior diverse clinical and basic research experience can help bridge. So the question was, how do you do that? And that's when I learned about Duke Design Health. The Duke Design Health program is a patient-focused program that discovers the pressing needs in healthcare and assembles teams from across different disciplines, engineering, business, medicine, and other disciplines to create real-world solutions. The program consists of 3 phases, the 3 Ds: discover, design, and deploy. So teams start with need screening, continue with defining and filter opportunities, figuring out solutions for these opportunities, and then designing and developing products that their implementation can address the clinical needs in the best possible way. I was very fortunate joining the program in their launch year, and it was an unbelievable experience. The growth of the program these past 2 years is unparalleled. One of the strengths of the program, you can send the slide, is the fact that it's being supported by many different departments at Duke and has the support of all entities focusing in this area of research like MEDEX, Pratt, the Pratt School of Engineering, Duke Clinical Research Institute, and so many others. But there's no better way to pass to you my experience without giving you an example. So when the pandemic hit the United States back in March, everything stopped. The fellowship program stopped. We had to basically redefine our goals, and we were asked by the hospital to actually focus on COVID. So we all know that caring for COVID-19 positive patients required added protection and safety for healthcare providers. And given the limited supplies of personal protective equipment and the high risk to healthcare providers, it is difficult to provide the proven standards of care to COVID-19 patients. So nursing and respiratory care personnel, we know that they're in the room much less often, which can set off a spiral of requiring heavy sedation, decreased care, prolonged times on the ventilator, and secondary complications. The risks of breaking the ventilatory circuit can lead to hesitancy performing ventilatory circuit exchanges, bronchoscopy, tracheostomy procedures. But furthermore, national guidelines are recommending delaying tracheostomies for 21 days in order to reduce exposure to healthcare providers much longer than the standard of care. In addition to that, non-invasive ventilation is not being offered to COVID-19 patients due to concerns of increasing the risk of viral contamination to staff and other patients. And this subsequently leads to more and more patients requiring intubation, and thus to a national shortage of ventilators. Well, in an era that the unknowns are more than the knowns, the healthcare providers have to deal with the increased levels of anxiety due to concerns of getting infected themselves or transmit the disease to their loved ones. Finally, there are currently no robust protocols for patient isolation while transporting infected patients inside the hospital. So we believe that there is an unmet clinical need, and a device that contains aerosol provides an extra layer of protection between the patient and healthcare providers could help achieve better outcomes for COVID-19 positive patients and allow current clinical practices to shift back toward normal higher standards. So we designed Coviads. Coviads is a modular disposable barrier protection device. The system can be fully assembled in under 2 minutes and is comprised of an aluminum frame, a thermoplastic polyurethane tent, and a negative pressure filtration ventilation system. Using integrated gloves, zippers, and a two-way box, Coviads allows clinicians and nurses to perform over 90% of patient care tasks without any exposure to virus particles. The low-cost filtration system has been tested to filter over 99.997% of particles at 0.3 microns, and this standard exceeds HEPA filtration requirements and is accomplished with extremely low-cost, non-medical filters. In emergency situations, the frame is designed to be removed in less than 10 seconds. Finally, Coviads is completely portable, using an optional battery supply, allowing it to be used for transplantation in addition to long-term ICU care. Use of Coviads adds non-invasive ventilation to the armamentarium of physicians in treating COVID-19 patients, thus indirectly reducing the burden on ventilator supplies. Coviads reduces PPE utilization, decreases healthcare providers' anxiety, enables meaningful visitation, and increases the capacity of hospitals in negative pressure isolation units at fraction of cost. So I'm excited. We have filed 2 provisional applications already and currently are filing the utility patent for this technology utilizing the USPTO pilot program for COVID-19 related technologies. We are awaiting any day now, we're in the 10th review, the response from the FDA for an emergency use authorization of the device. And although we have performed extensive usability testing with more than 120 healthcare providers, and we have buy-in and letters of recommendations and support from clinicians, nurses, and various head of departments, we are working with the IRB with a goal to perform usability and efficacy studies at Duke in order to be able to deploy this nationally, and why not even internationally. Well, I would like to thank all members and advisors of our team. This is not a one-man show, for their hard work and dedication. And thank you, Brian, for organizing this session. I'll be glad to answer any questions even now or via email or phone. Feel free to reach out to me.
Great, thanks, Konstantinos. Sarah Jane, why don't we go into you? We'll hold questions until the end.
Hey y'all, I'm Sarah Jane. I'm going to be talking about global surgery at Duke. So we have a few different collaborations and many more on the way. Our main collaborations that we're currently visiting and going to are in Uganda, Singapore, Myanmar, and Guatemala. And like I said, we have many more sites that we collaborate with but haven't traveled to yet. And we had plans this year to be traveling to more countries until COVID hit, so they will be coming. I thought I'd talk about a couple of my projects to show a breadth of examples of what things that we could do. One of the projects that we did was asking community members in Uganda what they thought about congenital anomalies like the one shown here. 100% of people that responded, and it was about 200 people, thought that the family would go into poverty if they sought medical care for their child. And that is actually fairly true. In a lot of other studies, catastrophic healthcare expenditure is significant for these families. 43% assume that the father would abandon the home, and 26% thought the child should just be left to die. And there was a big discrepancy in people who made less than about $13 a month. They were at higher risk of these happening to them. So it's really sad, and it's really a barrier of care, the perception of congenital anomalies in countries such as Uganda or low middle income countries. And it's something that we're hoping to be working on to increase these children's chance of survival. One of my main projects is it's kind of a clinical trial of sorts. It's a stepwise implementation design of a mobile health program to help revolutionize the care in Uganda for pediatric surgery. We're doing elective colorectal procedures, and basically what we're doing is we're hiring nurse coordinators to contact the family, because currently the only method that the families have of getting in contact with the surgeons or the hospital is to physically go there. And to actually physically go to the hospital can mean more than a 200-kilometer trip, which would take several days and a lot of money. And unfortunately, a lot of times they show up with their child, and we just have way too many cases to perform that are urgent or emergent. And so they wait on the wards for weeks at a time, and then they're just sent home with no surgery. So we're hoping that this will make things more efficient and cost effective for the families. We're also hoping that the nutrition of the kids will be better, because while they're waiting on the wards and their family isn't working, they have no food and no hygienic, no ways of hygiene. So we're hoping to improve a lot of care simply by implementing this program where we have coordinators able to call the families. And this work has led to a foundation award. Brian, mentioned that a couple of us have gotten foundation awards, and our department is really, really great about helping write grants. And we're very well regarded in the academic surgical culture. So we have a lot of support and a lot of resources that we can use to get you guys also funded. But like we all said, you don't have to do that. That's just a little extra something that we strive for. The final project I wanted to talk about is a little bit of a hybrid project with the School of Engineering here at Duke, also engineering school in Singapore and in Uganda. It's creating a low-cost laparoscope and a lift retractor that altogether costs about $30 to make. And we're currently testing this in animal prototypes, and then we're going to be doing a clinical trial in our site at Duke, and then also in Uganda, Myanmar, in Singapore, and a couple of other countries as well. So we're very excited about this, and we have patents for this, and we're hoping that this can really increase access to laparoscopic cases, because currently it relies on consumable devices, and the laparoscopic towers are extremely expensive. So if you have any kind of monitor, any kind of laptop, this eliminates the need for all consumables, the huge tower and the cost associated with that. And then also electricity, which is quite an issue in these settings. So we're hoping that this will really change the face of surgery internationally. We also have the Duke Global Health Institute that it covers all different aspects of medicine and collaborations with several departments such as economics, engineering, public health, pretty much anything you can think of. There are different specialties that contribute to this institute. You can obtain a Master's of Science in Global Health as well. They have internal grants and help you apply for external grants. And then they will support you in terms of grant writing, statistics, project writing, manuscript writing, and physically going to your countries. It's a really great resource. And no global health talk would be complete without a photo collage series. So here is from, I went to Uganda a couple times, and here's a picture of the ORs there. In the bottom left corner, you'll see the selection of non-rebreathers that you can choose from for the children. And what they do is they re-sterilize these just in this pot of solution. And all of their instruments are sterilized via submersion over there. So it's quite different. And there's some operating room tables shown as well. Here is a pediatric surgery ward on the left side. And basically all of the beds are in one big room. And you have maybe 1 or 2 nurses for probably about 40 kids. And they're all just together in one room so they can take care of them. And then there's on the bottom right is the ICU, the NICU. Here's some of the equipment that we have on selection. On the upper left-hand corner is a Bovie machine. We have some incubators here, and then specifically gastroschisis kids unfortunately don't often survive because they don't have TPN, but they found a clever way to cut Foley bags and sew them into the abdominal wall in order to make gastroschisis silo bags, which is actually another project of ours. So they are quite resourceful with what they do have. That's okay. Here's some of the surgeries that I performed. You lend a helping hand when you're over there. You do surgeries you have never thought of doing. I did some ortho procedures, uro procedures, of course, general surgery procedures. And at one point I was even playing anesthesiologist. So, it's you just lend a hand wherever you can. And it's a really great time. You meet a lot of great people and you meet a lot of pediatric surgeons from the US and also from around the world. And there's some fun things that you get to do. I went to the Equator. These are some of the students I taught, and then some of the residents and fellows, and then some of the attendings as well. And finally, I went on a safari. So, you can have some extracurriculars while you're doing your global surgery research as well. And it's just a really great time. So thanks for y'all's attention and time, and thanks to Brian for organizing this. Here's my email if y'all have any questions, or my cell phone, and I'd be happy to talk to y'all later.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah Jane. I think we are to you, Dr. Jawitz.
Yes. Thanks, everybody, for joining tonight. Again, my name is Oliver. I'm a 5th-year general surgery resident. I just completed 2 years in the lab, and I'm back now on clinical rotations. I'm interested in cardiac surgery, and I knew before I got here that I did not want to touch another pipette again. I had done plenty of that, and I am definitely more of the clinical research persuasion. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the opportunities that I took advantage of over the past 2 years. So I spent the last 2 years as a clinical research fellow at the Duke Clinical Research Institute, or the DCRI. And when I was in your shoes as a medical school student, as a residency applicant, I really didn't appreciate fully what the DCRI was and what amazing opportunities it was able to afford for me. So the DCRI is actually the world's largest academic research organization, or ARO. It houses a number of clinical trials, large clinical registries and databases, and it has an incredible number of resources available. And so as a research fellow there for the past 2 years, I had basically unparalleled access to the data that they house there at the DCRI, as well as some really incredible mentorship through the mostly cardiologists, but clinical faculty from all realms of medicine and surgery who work at the DCRI. And so this is just a little breakdown of the type of studies that are run through the DCRI, and they contain they run a good mixture of different types of studies, mostly phase 3. About 50% of their studies are phase 3 trials, but they also run phase 1 and all the way up through phase 4. They have about a quarter of their, or a fifth of their trials are mega trials. Those are trials where we're talking about tens of millions of dollars in terms of budget and thousands of patients. Number of small trials where we're talking about just a handful of patients. They have studies that range from neonates all the way up to the geriatric population, and they're split pretty evenly, 50-50 between industry and government funding. So basically, no matter what you're interested in terms of clinical research, they're doing it at the DCRI, and they're more than happy to get you involved in whatever you're interested in. And this is just a snapshot of the year 2019, the number of publications that came out of the DCRI, and it's pretty incredible. They published nearly 1,400 manuscripts out of that, out of the DCRI, and over 200 of them are high impact. So we're talking about New England Journal and JAMA papers. And as a research fellow, you get to lead many of these studies, be first author or middle author. You learn about writing clinical research manuscripts, engaging with statisticians, and really every stage of the clinical research process. And if you go to dcri.org, I put the URL on the bottom there, you can learn more about the DCRI as well. And lastly, in terms of the DCRI, the STS National Database, which is really one of the most well-known and well-regarded clinical registries in existence. It's the database from the Society of Thoracic Surgeons, so it contains records on almost every single cardiac and thoracic surgical procedure that's performed in the United States. That's housed at the DCRI. And as a research fellow, I had the opportunity to join the STS Access and Publications Committee. And so I was involved in nearly every single STS project that was being performed over the last 2 years, which is also a really incredible experience. And like Vignesh mentioned, I also was able to get my master's degree through the clinical research training program. And so this, the CRTP, which a number of us take advantage of, is typically a 2-year program, although they have some flexibility there. And you end up getting a Master's of Health Sciences degree. This was fully funded by the Department of Surgery. And it's basically really broad training in clinical research, from everything from basic statistics all the way up through ethics and clinical trials. There's a number of electives you can take, so you can really tailor your CRTP experience to what exactly you're interested in. I would highly recommend looking into that if you're interested in clinical research. And lastly, also, Vignesh mentioned this briefly, but there's a Duke CT Surgery Outcomes Research Group, mainly comprised of general surgery residents, but we also have many medical students at Duke, as well as CT surgery faculty that are closely involved. We do a large amount of mostly retrospective-based clinical research projects using the UNOS Transplant Registry, the National Clinical Database, or NCDB, as well as the Society for Thoracic Surgeons database. And this is just the research productivity that came out of the group. This is approximate over the last 2 years. And as you can see, they put out a huge number of manuscripts. We've been present at every single major international CT surgery meeting with both oral and poster presentations. And you can find out more about the Duke CT Surgery Outcomes Group on Twitter. I provided their handle there in the bottom right-hand corner. And if you have any questions about any of this, feel free to shoot me an email or shoot me a message on Twitter. And I look forward to chatting with you.
Dr. Cerullo.
Hey everyone. as I mentioned before, I'm Marcelo. I'm a PGY4, second year in the lab. I'm going to be talking about sort of two projects that are they're completely separate from each other, and both of which kind of hit upon the types of opportunities you can get here at Duke. My research time is actually as part of the inaugural cohort of the National Clinician Scholars Program. We have our little logo in the bottom left there. And the sponsors for this program here at Duke are the Department of Surgery, and I'm also actually, my salary is funded by the VA. That doesn't mean that I'm committed to doing VA research, but I get some clinical time over there. I'm kind of the pop-off valve. So principally, I came in to my research time in July of 2019, and if some of you might remember that there was a whole bunch of front page articles about this hospital in Philadelphia that was an academic hospital that had closed down, and all the residency spots were going to be scattered to surrounding hospitals and elsewhere, and really leaving trainees kind of out in the lurch, and also depriving a major metropolitan city of a fundamental trauma center and critical access services for a lot of its populace. This almost entirely was due to the fact that someone decided to make a lot of money off buying a hospital. And it was a specific private equity group that had purchased the hospital and then was basically selling it off for parts. The residency spots, the actual spots themselves, ended up being auctioned off for $55 million. And that was just one thing, one of the intangibles that came out of this. But I was a little bit more curious about what the after effects were, how pervasive private equity was, and other kinds of for-profit actors in different hospital markets. And I had looked at sort of monopoly systems in hospital markets as a medical student and as a junior resident. But this was a chance to really see whether or not this was something that had been touted as a good thing in the financial engineering world, but probably not the best kind of application to healthcare. You can go to the next slide, Brian. So I went to the Fuqua School of Business, and I sat down in front of one of their terminals and put together a whole bunch of put together all the leverage buyouts, all the deals in which these hospitals were bought and sold, just to give you a sense of how pervasive this is. The total dollar amount for all of the hospitals bought and sold by private equity firms in the United States is on the order of about $100 and some billion. That is just the hospitals, not to count the labor and equipment and potential profits. So there's a lot of money bound up in this. And then taking these hospitals and seeing how their patients do. You can go to the next slide, Brian. We found out where these hospitals were, and we started calculating their margins, and we submitted a couple of presentations and publications for describing what we found, and we're actually just digging into the data now, linking all of the individual level data in terms of Medicare claims to each of these hospitals, and doing a couple of interesting economic analyses about the kind of equilibria that these hospital markets may or may not achieve when one of these very aggressive for-profit actors enters. On the right here, you can see a bunch of my mentors. The gentleman on the top, Anese Affordile, he's actually a plastic surgeon at MD Anderson. Chuck Scales is a senior member of the Division of Urology over on the left. And the two gentlemen on the right are both economists here at Duke. And the woman down in the bottom left, Vivian Ho, she's the chair of health economics at Rice. So I think I have a very diverse mentoring team. You can go to the next slide, Brian. And the next project was kind of one of those things that came about because there was an idea, and I was able to find some people who could think that this is something actually worth pursuing. One of the things we struggle with in surgery is we struggle with figuring out if the decision that we're about to make preoperatively about the operation is the right one, and sometimes we're afforded only with afforded with 20/20 hindsight. In the field of better and better imaging, we can actually sort of contour tumors as radiation oncologists do, but then kind of try to make predictions or try to take assay agnostic approaches to imaging data so that we can make predictions about how well patients will do once we take out their cancer. So I'm working with two medical physicists, Dr. Lafata, he's on the top left, and Dr. Fangfang Yin, he's in the bottom left. And Dr. Tong in the top right is a thoracic surgeon, and Dr. Chris Kelsey is a radiation oncologist. And we're using a database of patients who undergo radiation therapy and a database of patients who underwent surgery to figure out if we can develop this novel digital biomarker. You know, what kind of surgeon I'm going to be when I grow up? I hope it'll be a good one. I'm very confident that I'm getting a whole bunch of experiences here that I don't think I really could have gotten anywhere else, nor that I think I really could have imagined when I was applying. And I'm extremely grateful to a lot of my mentors and my co-residents. Feel free to tweet at me. I know that's the new thing. I'm usually pretty good on email, and no question I think is really out of bounds. We're here to help you guys be successful with this application cycle.
Awesome. Doreen, you want to finish it up?
Yeah, just really quickly, I'll talk about my lab experience. So I'm working in a laboratory of, for transformative administration, as you can see there. Basically, this was created a couple years ago by one of our general surgery residents. They had a question about operations and efficiency. And one of the great things about Duke is if you have an idea, you have a bunch of people that are willing to support you and make this happen. So Dr. Lisa Pickett is a trained general surgeon, and she is my PI. She's the CMO of Duke. And she is just a wonderful mentor. The project that I kind of got started working with is a passion of mine because of clinical work, actually. It was with the vascular surgery service. The patients there would get admitted, and we just weren't able to find a lot of OR time for these patients. So they would be delayed getting their definitive procedure on an average of 3 days. So I've been working with her trying to figure out exactly why there is a delay, if it's the ORs, if it's scheduling, just looking at different avenues and aspects of that to see how we can improve and how we can work with different teams to have improved patient outcomes for our patients. Some other projects that we've done in the past have to do with value-based care and looking at certain procedures, seeing how certain surgeons compare to their colleagues, if they're using different materials, if they're taking longer in the OR, and approaching each of these surgeons individually to see if we can reduce costs for the hospital, and also if they're taking too much time or anything like that, just see where they compare to other their colleagues. I think there was a question about MBAs. So that was a question that I had for Dr. Harpel, and he did support the MBA. I talked with Dr. Pickett. She didn't end up getting an MBA. She kind of just fell into this administrative role. So she actually had me contact Dr. Lipkin, who's a urologist, but is also very big in administration. He recently got an MBA. I think that it's not a bad idea if this is the route that you want to go with administration. However, I wanted to do more of like the CRTP program and do more clinical research and go that route. So I wasn't pursuing an MBA. However, I don't know, Joe Nellis is still on here, but he has an MBA and he's also in the LTA program if you wanted to chat about that for a little bit.
Yeah, I can talk that. I originally got my MBA during medical school. The reasons for that being early on in medical school, I did some program development that we ended up obtaining some grant funding for, and then kind of expanded that pretty quickly into a master's program for the hospital system. And at that time, I had some encouragement from mentors of mine to continue to pursue an MBA from a leading change standpoint. From an operational standpoint. At that point, they said there's really not going to be ever a good time, but just to go into it for the right reasons. So I think, everyone's going to pursue research activities or additional degrees for their own reason. And I think thinking about those and really, figuring out what you want to do first is the most important thing. It's not about a CV. It's about your future and how you feel you're going to make the biggest impact for your patients in the future and where you're happy making that impact. So I think with everyone presenting their research, the biggest thing I think that goes home is everyone's having a great time doing their research and they're doing it because they want to do it. It was a lab that Dr. Kirk or their mentors told them they had to go do. I think, that's something that was pretty unique at Duke, where if you want to do something, you can do it. And so I've been working some time in the LTA, doing some value-based care programs. But then I'm also doing translational work with non-human primates and large animals in the congenital cardiac research space. So.
Awesome. And we have a special guest here. I just want to call on Justin Barr. I saw you were on the call. You have a very unique type of research before we get into the Q&A, and feel free to put your questions in the chat at any time here as we are winding down.
Hey guys, my name is Justin. I'm a PGY 6, spent 2 years in the lab. I'm from Virginia, went to undergrad at WashU where I majored in history, got a PhD in history at Yale, and went to med school at UVA before matching to Duke. And my PhD work at Yale focused on history of medicine, history of surgery. And so when I was applying to residency, I was very explicit at the different programs saying that I really wanted to do history research, not science or outcomes. And I met a range of reactions on the interview trail. And one of the things that really attracted me to Duke is that people were not just willing to tolerate that, but were actually really excited and enthusiastic about a somewhat off-the-wall idea of being a surgeon historian. And that was everyone from Dr. Kirk to Dr. McGalley to the residents that I met when I interviewed them. And the residency has played out perfectly from that regard. I spent 2 years in the quote-unquote lab, but I was really a historian. I just had an office. I wrote my book. I taught an undergrad course on the history of medicine at Duke, and I've been supported financially and mentored throughout the department over those years. I'm happy to talk about it in more detail, but I really just want to underscore what other people have both demonstrated and said, that I think one of the really awesome things about Duke is that it's willing to support whatever scholarship you find important and about which you are passionate. And the goal here is to create an amazing academic surgeon. What area of academics, well, we largely leave up to you.